Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 11th webinar on COP26 for the Local Governments and Municipal Authorities Constituency. My name is Yunus Arik and I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLE Local Governments for Sustainability, and I'm also acting as the focal point of Local Governments and Municipal Authorities Constituency to the UNFCCC. Today will be our last webinar of the year. Those who have been familiar with our webinars, this is coming monthly. And in that regard, because of the end of the year, it will be more like a summary of the outcomes or achievements that we have seen over the past couple of months throughout the 2020. Those who are familiar, we are recording those webinars, then it's uploaded on our YouTube, and you will be also having access to the presentation as well. And for the sake of the smooth flow of the presentation, we are muting all attendees at the beginning of the webinar. During the webinar, you may have the chance to type in your questions in your question box, or then when we finish it, we can raise your hands and we can unmute you so that you can intervene and provide updates from your side or raise any questions. So that is how we will run this webinar today. Again, coming back to the agenda, we will start with our recalling our LGMA roadmap and the processes. We will spend most of our time on a review of our achievements, and we will also share a draft agenda in 2021. Those who are familiar, but also for those who are new, as we said, those monthly webinars are all recorded. Every month we basically had an assessment of what has happened before and what will come up in the next couple of weeks and months. So in this regard, the LGMA webinars enjoyed also guests who contributed to these discussions or dialogues. In this regard, I'd like to acknowledge the support and participation of Jordan Harris from COP25 presidency, Kristen Moserdale from COP26 presidency, of course, high-level action champions Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz they were also with us. We had a special session on the 17th of June on land and nature, so in collaboration with Edinburgh Process and the UNFCCC as well. And the rest of the months, we basically reviewed our progress in terms of preparations. One session in October was reserved as part of the Daring Cities Forum of ICLE, and in November we also joined by our new partner, Rwanda Association of Local Governments, Ladislas Ngendahimana, as well as Duncan Booker from Glasgow City Council. So through this opportunity, I'd like to thank all of them for their kind support, which enriched our discussions, and we look forward to more opportunities in the next year ahead. We are particularly focusing on Paris Agreement. There is a simple reason for that. The climate action has been in the space for more than 30 years or so, but the difference is that the UNFCCC in 1994 or adopted in 1992, or the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, they never have acknowledged the role and engagement of local and regional governments. Therefore, we were a bit outside of this process for a long while. However, after all these years of efforts, the preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement officially recognizes the importance of engagement of all levels of governments. Therefore, we are calling that the true spirit of Paris Agreement is a multi-level collaboration. This also, of course, complements the other key points of the Paris Agreement, like climate neutrality by the mid-century and 1.5-degree goal. So these three are our most unique elements of the Paris Agreement from our side. How we reached to this process, obviously, as we said, for the first 20 years, it was challenging. Starting from 2007, we made a more aggressive roadmap advocacy positioning. With Copenhagen, we didn't give up. We continued our effort on building the multilateral system. So especially starting from 2012, ADP negotiations together with Friends of Cities, like-minded countries in the UN system, obviously UN Climate Summit and Nazca platform, these all helped us to reach to the Paris Agreement. And afterwards, of course, there were new mechanisms, new initiatives. We continued our advocacy as a constituency, LGMA constituency, but we supported the Marrakesh Partnership. We were driving more force in the Talanoa dialogues. We had worked with the new way of engagement with the national government under the Friends of Multi-Level Action, and we have actively supported the Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit. And as you see, in addition to preamble paragraph, we have a number of references in the Paris Agreement itself, and of course, in the rest of the decisions, strong reference to local and regional governments that we are responsible for the success and failure of the Paris Agreement, and in particular that together with all these provisions, Paris Agreement is not anymore a voluntary process for local and regional governments. It is our mandate, it is our duty. Therefore, we have to reflect all these principles to our local and regional government development and climate action plans as well. With this regard, let's recall that climate process is a cyclic process. Every year, the country who hosted the summit at the end of the year continues to be the political leadership so that they enforce the implementation of the outcomes. But the country who will host, they will also take on the leadership in terms of preparing the agenda for the upcoming COP, and also present their initiatives and ideas. So obviously this was a cyclic process for a year, but because of the COVID reasons, we are now feeling a 2 years process now. Currently, until Glasgow COP presidency will be under the Chilean hands. Ms. Carolina Schmidt, Her Excellency, Minister of Environment, will lead this process, and her high-level action champion is Gonzalo Munoz. Whereas in the UK side, we have the President-designate Alok Sharma, and he is the lead for the Secretary of State for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. He has appointed Nigel Topping as his high-level climate action champion. He had also additionally importantly announced Mark Carney as his finance advisor. But throughout the months of the 2020, UK government, as part of the presidency, have demonstrated an ambitious commitment to design the most inclusive COP from their perspectives for all actors of this space. And in that regard, they delivered their promise in the sense that they have launched a number of initiatives. For example, initially in May already, they have created the Friends of COP, and from local governments, we have the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, also in his capacity as the C40 chair, part of this Friends of COP. In the next couple of months, they have the UK presidency announced Cities and Regions Advisory Council for the UK cities. Again, a more active engagement or synergetic engagement with their devolved administrations. This is a particular concept for the UK. This defines Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. So they also have a separate process with them. There is also a civil society and youth advisory council. And in that council, I am participating in my capacity on behalf of ICLE, but I also convey our messages from the LGMA position in that regard. There are other bodies or committees created, but these are the most relevant for the local governments as such. As we said, the presidencies and the UNFCCC official agenda is cyclic, but the presidencies has their own agendas as well. How do we engage is that we define our engagement through our mechanisms, like showcasing our progress in our work, contributing into the consultations or workshops, and contributing to the decision making. Obviously, we are not signing any agreements, but we are providing our input through interventions and through our collaboration with multi-level Friends of Multi-Level Action, friendly countries. They are the ones who are tabulating our inputs to the decision-making process, or especially the negotiated documents. When we concluded in Glasgow, in Madrid in 2019 COP25, we have launched our Glasgow roadmap when we were aiming to achieve the COP26 as the multi-level action COP to reflect the true spirit of the Paris Agreement. And we have made 6 pillars, and during the year we have introduced the 7th pillar through through the Glasgow Council as well. I will not go through all the details because it will be my next slide. And as you can see, we are trying to match our priorities with the priorities of the presidency so that our outputs can find their way into the presidency outcomes as well. This is a snapshot. It lists both what did we achieve in both the pillars, but also how did we achieve it in the sense that what were the key milestones on the way forward, and how we have advanced on this process as such. So I'd like to go through it, let's say, in more systematically in this slide. I will try to map all our Paris, all our roadmap outcomes in the sense. So let's be realistic. The primary success of COP26 is for nations to deliver their homework, which is bring new NDCs to COP, and this is done at home. It's not decided in COP. It is decided much earlier. And when we were in Madrid, we were saying that this is the reason why we're pushing for multi-level governance. One of the reasons is that we know none of the NDCs are fit for the purpose of Paris Agreement because of a simple reality, because all the NDCs, the current ones, are designed and decided before the Paris Agreement. So definitely this multi-level spirit, this 1.5 degree goals, this climate neutrality are not existing in any of those NDCs. So this is the simple reason why we're expecting every nation to bring their NDCs, and hopefully if they're integrated or in collaboration with the local and regional governments, we are confident it will be more ambitious. And that connects to the first priority for us as an active stakeholder of the Paris process. Our main homework before asking any progress from the national governments, of course, that we deliver our own homework in raising ambition and making our societies ready for the journey to a Paris Agreement compatible new development. In that regard, we are confident that we have more than 500 cities and regions already announced their climate neutrality by 2050 or earlier. These are the ones that will be primarily looking forward to increasing their presence into the race to zero, but also in the race for resilience. In the NDC vertical integration process, I must confess, personally, this was much impressive outcomes than I have ever expected, even when we were in Madrid. First of all, in the institutional process of the NDC partnership, an initiative, a multinational initiative, where ICLE is one of the first associate members, there is a process called Climate Action Empowerment Program. This is the one that is helping developing country nations to bring their new NDCs. And in that process, we have 7 countries where ICLE is working, but it's around 50 countries overall. And more than 50% of those countries have a reference to subnational engagement. That's good news. We are particularly excited by the experience and leadership of Chile and Rwanda, in the sense that they were demonstrating how they can raise ambition by integrating local and regional governments. The Chilean case was particularly important because they were connecting the COVID-19 recovery process to their NDCs. So that is a very innovative way of working. But above all, we were impressed by the mobilization in Japan and Korea. We will go into details. They have not made their NDCs ready yet, but they have made a very high level at the president or prime minister level, a commitment that they will aim for climate neutrality by 2050, which was not the case a year ago. Therefore, we also see how national ambitions were elevated or increased by the local action. So the Japan and Korean case are particularly unique for us, and we commend these countries and the stakeholders inside there. Today, there was already announcement of the EU Climate Pact. Obviously, European process will be important for us. They have already adopted 2030 targets. And there will be a huge discussion about, like the Japan or Korea or in the EU case, how we can demonstrate regional and locally determined contributions, where GCOM is leading us in that process. Throughout the year, there were no negotiations. Therefore, there were not too many direct interactions with the Friends of Multi-Level Action. However, we have also been collaborating with the initiative led by German government on the Partnership for Collaborative Action. And we would like to see how these two processes will feed into each other in the years ahead, especially towards COP26. On the finance, we have a good news. There was a gap fund launched in the Climate Action Summit in 2019. This is now operationalized by September 2020. Now we have a concrete process where our project pipelines can now be receiving advisory services through facilities like ICLE's TAP or Felicity or C40 Finance initiative, so that the project preparations are speeded up. They are much more ready for receiving donor or grants, and we can demonstrate our delivery of our actions. In that sense, this is particularly important because we all know that there is an interesting tendency now, that's a very good progress, that both national governments and local governments are announcing their divestment from fossil fuels. The UK government, Japan, they have all announced that they will not fund overseas or official development assistance for fossil fuels, and more than 68 cities around the world have announced their divestment. So this means that there is more and more volume of money in the global and national markets or funds that can now come much more rapidly or in much more scale to the local or urban development for climate-friendly urban development. So that's why we have to push the climate finance. Obviously, the Article 6 negotiations is not too much advanced this year, but we'll also connect this to those efforts as well. In Madrid, we have announced a balance between mitigation and adaptation, and that proved to be an important factor in the case of COVID recovery, response, and redesign. Obviously, those countries who have been able to connect to climate action and to COVID recovery were the ones who were able to both be more ambitious and both provide much progressive solutions to their COVID responses. In that sense, we were also part of the initiative led by Japan for a redesign perspective, a new concept, that it is not just amending the past experiences, but introducing those who have not been possible in the past, so that we think about a 5 or 10 years framework, that we really shift, leapfrog, make a scaled approach or steep change in our development of our cities and our countries that is more climate friendly. So we welcome this concept of redesign. And we also welcome the UN Secretary General's policy brief that is important in that regard. On the transport, we have seen that there were not too much progress in the international transport, maritime or aviation, but we have in the urban context, we have developed ecologistics principle, which addresses urban freight in terms of air quality and climate action in the cities. So we believe that will also help us to move forward. And on the 100% renewables, we are already aware that we have more than 300 cities who are now transitioning to 100% renewables. So these are exciting news. Since Madrid, we have been working on circular economy, and we have been focusing on the nature, because this year was supposed to be the super year for nature. In both elements, we have now concrete, let's say, guidance documents in front of us. We have in the Marrakesh Partnership Human Settlements Pathway a separate working group on waste and consumption, which definitely refers to 1.5 degree living or social equity or zero waste, so that the circularity is much more embedded in the human settlements. Similarly, the nature process or the biodiversity process have made huge progress this year. The Scottish government initiated an Edinburgh Declaration with the Convention on Biodiversity, which is formulating the inputs of the local and subnational governments into the biodiversity process, and this is also acknowledged as an official input to the official negotiations to be held in Kunming in China. And meanwhile, this year, for the first time, there was the heads of state level biodiversity summit during the UN General Assembly. So it was giving us the opportunity that climate action, in particular, both adaptation as nature-based solutions, but also using nature-based solutions as a mitigation, has now become much more of evidence in our plan. So therefore, we believe this was also a timely agenda item that we were focusing on. And one of our agenda items was also to amplify the global action. The logic was that, yes, we know climate agenda is led by ministers of environment or ministers of climate change, and because of the proximity or the relevance, they are engaging ministers of energy, ministers of finance, minister of transport, agriculture. Yes, we are not against any of those, and there should be a much more integration with them. And we're also seeing that originally those ministers who were resistant or skeptic about climate action are now much more friendly or climate friendly now. But we also would like to address other ministers in the national governments, such as ministers of urbanization, education, culture, youth, family. These are the ones that are much more positive for the climate action. And if we can bring them more into the climate debate, we believe the outcomes would be much more ambitious, and that will also help the national government. So it's not just local governments against national governments or vice versa. Within national governments, there are also other ministers who are having a huge role for transformative climate action, and if they are on board, the NDCs would be much more ambitious. So Our goal is to have at Glasgow the first urbanization ministerial at the climate conference. We don't know how this will be materialized, of course, because this depends on how we'll bring UN Habitat on board, how the COP26 presidency will react to this. But it is an idea that we would like to see to bring a new added value to the discussions. Obviously, throughout the year, we also have discussed a lot with the UN 75, which is particularly important because of the concept of inclusive multilateralism being much more enshrined in the UN process. And in that regard, Paris Agreement have already demonstrated that it is not anymore a national government issue, but it is also whole of society and whole of government approach. Throughout the year, we had a huge collaboration with the culture community, especially Climate Heritage Network. This could play a huge role in the pre-COP in Italy because their sensitivity on the culture agenda as well. And in addition to all these efforts, we also would like to address that within the UNFCCC process, there are a number of initiatives like the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is addressing the public awareness, public participation, or the stakeholder mechanisms like constituencies and others, that capacity building process. These all should speak similar languages. They should help each other so that we make the synergy across all agenda items of the UNFCCC or all bodies of the UNFCCC. And our last pillar is recently introduced by the city of Glasgow. We are grateful on that regard for their ownership and leadership to introduce a new concept into the climate action, into the LGMA roadmap. This is branded as climate justice and social equity, particularly when we were listening to Susan Aitken, leader of the Glasgow City Council. Wherever she was speaking, she was mentioning that Glasgow was the birthplace of industrial revolution, and they want to be also the birthplace for a complete new transformative climate development, and that COP26, by hosting COP26, this will be an opportunity for them to demonstrate this. But obviously in the Glasgow, in the communities of Glasgow who are suffering from the transition from an industrial legacy to a green economy, but also in countries across the world who are suffering from those changes, who are not benefiting the offering of the new transformative agenda items because of the inequalities in our societies and among the countries. Therefore, Glasgow has recommended us to include climate justice and social equity. This was excellent complementarity to our work, because during the year, we also had a huge discussion on that. The Global Covenant of Mayors and Global Task Force have made a joint statement on climate justice, especially in reference to the discussions in the US, but we also have referred that in the human settlements pathway, we have an agenda item on social inequalities or social justice. Therefore, this seventh pillar will definitely enrich our discussions and preparations towards COP, and we are grateful for the Glasgow City Council to open these doors for us, and we will be working for them in terms of how exactly deliverables we can introduce to the process. In the next slides, I will not want to repeat, but I would like to recap some interesting moments of our work, both to honor and to recap what we have achieved, but also express our gratitude to all those who contributed in this journey. Obviously, this was a unique year. Everybody was struggling, but it's with a nice, let's say, outcome. It turned into a huge opportunity that the physical distance may be the barrier for us, but through technology, there were much more opportunities for us to engage with a number of partners and stakeholders. We have, in May, already started with a specific dialogue of the climate champions, both Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz in our LGMA webinars. This was a door opener for both sides. We have understood their expectations, they have understood our priorities or the way we are working, and that was one of the things that helped us to advance in the initiatives of the champions and the Marrakesh partnership. So we're grateful for their leadership and their openness and their interest to show us in this process actively. 2 weeks later, we have also a remarkable event, a ministerial and mayoral roundtable, which gathered from more than I think 20 national government ministers, but also the 3 heads of the UNs, the UN Environment Program, UN Development Program, and UN Habitat, with our leaders, primarily UCLG and Global Covenant of Mayors and ICLE and others joined, and that was also strengthening our discussion on for multi-level collaborative action. As we said, throughout the year, there were numerous initiatives outside the UNFCCC that we wanted to feed into the process. The broad process was the one on nature, and you can see how diverse networks they have been involved. The good thing, of course, Glasgow and Scottish Government are also involved in both climate action and the biodiversity. So we believe the results of Edinburgh process, the declaration, would provide inputs to the climate agenda as well, and vice versa from climate. We can feed into that. UN Habitat guidance document on NDCs and in the urban climate action will also help us, especially to develop the regional and locally determined contributions, to conceptualize it much better. And as we said, in September, the Japanese government platform for redesign was excellent opportunity for us to speak about transformative actions which are beyond the existing the agendas, but much more long-term and big scale of investment. So we look forward to localization of this redesign in the days ahead or weeks ahead. As we have seen in June, with the launch of the campaign of the Champions Race to Zero, we were immediately there as local and regional governments. There were so many of us in committing to Race to Zero. And in the launching event, we also had Mayor of Entebbe joining us from Africa, demonstrating that climate action, ambitious climate actions across the countries, across the regions, that everybody has a role to play. And in that sense, I think we had enjoyed very much the contribution from Mayor of Entebbe. A month later, ICLEI had advanced in particular its progress on Race to Zero preparations of its members, and here we have combined a dialogue between the UNFCCC champions, but especially Minister of Environment of Japan, with the leaders from Japan, Korea, and Australia, and Europe. And in fact, many of them are now incorporated in the Race to Zero, but this was giving us the vision of how we can formulate our compliance with the minimum criterion and other elements of the process, and for champions to understand better what we are working on. As we said, during this process, at the end, we resulted in an initiative called Cities Race to Zero as a campaign, is inscribed or empowered by a number of actors, including C40, CDP, ICLEI, UCLG, WWF, and WRI. And in that regard, this would play a huge role to mobilize more actors, especially the goal to bring 1,000 commitments. What we have seen already in the Race to Zero, there's 500, but we also know there is a huge pool of existing commitments, for example, within ICLEI network, that is in addition to the existing 500, around 400 more local and regional governments across the world who have committed to climate neutrality. So we wish to see them on board into this Cities Race to Zero through appropriate mechanisms, but we also would like to reach out to those other local governments, such as those who have declared a climate emergency, or those who have been working on a transition to 100% renewables, or those who are divesting from fossil fuels. In its entirety, this is making around 1,000 cities and regions across the world, and this will definitely be one of the first comers, hopefully, to the Cities Race to Zero, as well as Regions Race to Zero as well, in the weeks and months ahead. Throughout the year, UNFCCC had also unique challenges. They couldn't convene in that sense the negotiation sessions, but starting from November onwards, they tried to introduce new ways of interaction. They have deployed a very successful virtual conference platform, and this enabled a much better interaction between both the negotiators and the stakeholders or constituencies. In that regard, we have participated as LGMA both at the opening and the closing by addresses from Mayor of Santiago and Mayor of Glasgow, so that the handover from Chile to UK was also resembled in our constituency. In between, in the climate voices, we have a number of cities and regions such as Mayor of Turku, Mayor of Bonn, as well as Regions 4 and ICLEI Secretary Generals. The Kuadukuzu Mayor also contributed in the video messages. We hosted for the first time an LGMA special event. This was a unique feature of the Secretariat. It was traditionally stakeholders were invited to have their side events, but because of the restrictions, this time they invited as a constituency-based event. And in that regard, we partner with the Climate Change Association and ICLE. Our event was also bringing added value or bringing updates from our side to the UNFCCC negotiations. The recordings are also available on the UNFCCC website. In that session, we have heard how the process from Cote d'Ivoire to Japan is changing. Cote d'Ivoire case was much more a bottom-up, whereas Minister of Environment of Japan was multi-level in terms of leadership from the national government as a top-down approach. And at the open dialogue, LGMA constituency also provided active contributions. This was a unique process since 2018 that cities or stakeholders and national governments are having same seat at the table and having the same opportunities of interaction. So in addition to ICLE as the LGMA focal point, we had Committee of the Regions, we have Rwanda, the Local Government Association, and we have Scottish Convention of Local Authorities representatives at the highest level intervening into this process and sharing our updates to the presidency and other national governments. So we are also very happy that we were strongly present in this process. Once again, it is worthwhile to recall the leadership from Japan and Korea. Here you can see the map from the Japanese cities and prefectures. This was a very valuable effort, a political agenda from Minister of Environment of Japan, Mr. Koizumi. He particularly personally attached his leadership into this process. So through the recommendations of Ministers of Environment, many Japanese cities, now more than 50%, around 65% of Japanese population is now committed to a net zero target by 2050. And if this was not possible, very likely it will not be easy for Japanese Prime Minister to announce a commitment of climate neutrality of Japan as a country by 2050. So this was an excellent collaboration of how multi-level collaboration can serve and feed each other. Whereas the local governments in Korea were a bit following a slightly different model. Here there were much more bottom-up initiative. In that sense, we know in Japan there was a huge progress for many years in 1996 onwards, that there is ministerial legislation asking for information from local governments. And in the case of Korea, there is another style. For example, there had been a lot of experience in the local Agenda 21. South Korea has been recognized as the most successful country for local communities gathering around the spirit of local Agenda 21. This paved off, in particular in this climate ambition process, because of these initiatives, all local governments in Korea announced declared a climate emergency on the 5th of June. And a month later, among those, several of them have stepped up their ambition and announced their climate neutrality targets. And those leaders, pioneering leaders, gathered around new institutions like a new association for climate neutrality led by Mayor Yeom Mayor of Suwon, who is also in the ICLE leadership, but also the president of the National Association of Mayors in Korea. And with this mobilization helped the parliament in Korea to adopt, also announce a climate emergency declaration. And a month later, the president of Korea, the executive body of the country, building on all these bottom-up approaches and political commitments, he also announced Korea is on track for a 2050 target by climate neutral target by 2050. Obviously, both Japan and Korea has to now enshrine this political vision into their NDCs over the next months. But we are confident that this will have a strong element to the local and regional government's contribution. Both the national stakeholders and ICLE and other partners will of course be supporting this process so that we make sure the NDCs reflect to this multi-level spirit. Throughout the year, there were numerous engagements. We started in August in Chile. Santiago was hosting the second Local Environmental Authorities Forum. This was also a remarkable mobilization across the continent, and they have come up their own roadmap for regional roadmap for Latin America, but it was very much resembling the global agenda of LGMA COP26 roadmap. So we were very happy that the leadership of CC35, but other networks like ICLE, FLACMA, GCOM, WWF have all contributed to this process, and Chile, not just at the national level, but also at the local level, demonstrated this leadership. Similarly, in Africa, we had the virtual Congress Logs for Africa with a focus on finance for Africa, and This is important because next presidency will go to Africa, and in that sense, this session was supported and hosted by City of Kigali, Rwanda Local Government Association, and the government of Rwanda, the first country in Africa who presented an NDC, second NDC. In that regard, we will be continuing to collaborate with the Rwandan local government and the national government to continue this leadership across Africa and across the world. In Europe, the Sustainable Cities and Towns Conference, hosted under the auspices of the Mannheim, City of Mannheim, have adopted their local European Green Deals as a contribution to the European Green Deal, and this definitely will trigger a number of initiatives, because there is a clear sense that just a European Green Deal cannot succeed if there is no support or ambition or an engagement from the local governments and cities and regions across Europe. Daring Cities was, of course, a mobilization across the November 3 weeks from ICLE and City of Bonn, but it was incorporating more than 800 cities, around 10 ministers and UN heads of agencies. That was the response to our climate emergency and also to COVID, and the sense that COVID recovery and ambitious climate action can go hand in hand, and the concept of know more, act better, and lead together is the motto of the Daring Cities for responding to climate emergency. And we definitely have enjoyed the participation from both ministers of COP25 as well as COP26 and many other national and global leaders as well. During the process of the Marrakesh Partnership, we had also enjoyed our engagement in the climate action pathways. As we said, now we have an action agenda for human settlements, which is very clearly described in both built environment but also waste and consumption. And during the November dialogues, we also hosted 3 consecutive events, each feeding into a different concept, but demonstrating that cities and regions are a core partner of the Race to Zero, as well as now the upcoming Race to Resilience. Throughout the year, we had incorporated a number of initiatives with the culture community. As we said, Beethoven Pastoral Project was one of those on the 5th of June. But in particularly the Climate Heritage Network, who have introduced this concept of introducing culture as an important element, which was supported for a long time by our colleagues from UCLG. But this was definitely the right moment, because we are all discussing that it's not anymore that we are incrementally shaping a future, but instead we are leapfrogging our mindset, we are leapfrogging our development paradigm shift, and this can only be possible if there's a social buy-in, and if this addresses not just the minds but also the hearts of the people. And when you want to talk about the hearts and minds, definitely music, arts, and cultural heritage is definitely something that we should embark on, something that we should benefit in, and we would like to hope that in the next couple of months there will be more interaction between climate and culture community or heritage community and the LGMA constituency as well. Last but not least, of course, December was particularly very busy because of the Paris 5th anniversary agreement. The Climate Ambition Summit had an inclusive perspective, both in the live and on-demand sessions. There were numerous entries from local and regional governments. In the live session, we had C40 governors from the US, and in the on-demand, we have the videos from LGMA as a collaborative constituency, but from ICLE and others as well. The days before the COP, the Climate Ambition Summit, we also had seen impressive mobilization in France and the UK. For example, in France, City of Paris hosted 2 days event, Forum Zero Carbon, which was honoring the City of Paris ownership to the Paris Agreement, but also globally demonstration of our progress since 5 years. And similarly, on the 10th, the UK 100, one of the partner organizations of the LGMA roadmap, have launched their own pathway to COP26, which was also announcing 2030 commitments by many councils and regional administrations in the UK. These will all feed to our work and the way forward, and we are very happy, especially in the host country. There is much more active engagement in addition to Glasgow and Scottish government, but also across UK we have local governments being part of the process. This is our last slide. This is a month by month mapping of what could be expected in the years in the next couple of months. Obviously, one of the important points we have to address is that because COVID pandemic is still not over, we are seeing the second, third, or even fourth phases. There is high chance that either these all events are online and virtual, and especially in the case of negotiations, some of them may still be postponed. What we are expecting is that among those, maybe, and because of the time it's towards the end of the year, the COP in Glasgow may be the one that could be materialized even in the presence of COVID, because there will be a lot of lessons learned and many of the measures probably. But if this would be the case, we believe it will be a hybrid case, which is we will not just go back to the traditional thousands of people mobilizing in the sessions, but it's very likely it will be much less in number, but much more in virtual connections. But these are all open options on the table. So let's see. If we go monthly calendar, there will be a climate action adaptation summit hosted by Global Center for Adaptation and City of Rotterdam. This will be the moment where race to resilience of the champions will also be formulated in much more details. In February, there is this fifth UN Environment Assembly to be held in Nairobi, still on a virtual basis, but this will be the first part because the official and most political part of the UN Environment Assembly will be convened in 2022 in collaboration or in synergy with the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Environment Conference. In March, we are expecting or excited to have two important events. One is the International Net Zero Cities Forum by Minister of Environment of Japan as part of their commitments that was announced this year. And lately, a couple of hours ago, I've been informed that COP26 presidency will also convene a climate and development summit, particularly for climate vulnerable communities and constituencies and countries. So we will see, and we will make sure that the local and regional governments are appropriately engaged into this process. In April, ICLE will celebrate and convene its World Congress virtually, but with the auspices of the city of Malmö. Of course, every governance meetings of institutions give inputs to the commitment. So we are expecting through ICLE World Congress, we will also accelerate our ambitious, and this will also be an input to the LGMA process as well, like other networks. At the moment, officially, in the May, we have the agendas of biodiversity COP15 and UN Transport Conference, both to be hosted in China, but there are rumors that both of them may be postponed to the third quarter in the fall of 2022-21. In June, there will be an expectation that UNFCCC will be able to convene the negotiation session, or whether it will be a repetition of the climate dialogue that we have seen in November. And we will also see on the 5th of June a official kickoff of this UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which also relates to our local and subnational climate action and biodiversity action as well. In July, we will be participating in the high-level political forum. This is a moment to review the progress on SDGs, and obviously there is a momentum, a growing momentum for voluntary local reviews that many local and regional governments are also embarking on. And for the SDGs agenda, climate action will be one of those that will be with the particular emphasis as well. We are expecting August may be relatively calm, but starting from September, agenda will of course peak, especially with the UN General Assembly, as well as the way G7 and G20 presidencies will convene. If you can recall, this year particularly was a bit low profile because of the leadership of the US and Saudi Arabia, but next year we are expecting it both G7 and G20 to be particularly more ambitious because it's in the hands of the UK and Italy, who are also trying to make sure the agenda is also connected to climate summit. And we're also aware that there will be a new US administration which will bring additional momentum and power to multilateralism, as well as increasing the ambitions of G7 and G20 as well. There are announcements that there may be a high-level dialogue on energy during the UN General Assembly, and IUCN also will host its Congress in September, which is an important intergovernmental international organization. So the outcomes will also providing inputs to biodiversity and climate negotiations. October will very likely be the busiest month. We are expecting to have the UN Food System Summit, which is following the Climate Summit and the Biodiversity Summit at the heads of state level. This is important because food is a cross-cutting element, both for mitigation and adaptation, as well as justice and equity and natural resources. So this would be hopefully introducing new ways of engagement of our development paradigm shift, so that every element of our society is climate and biodiversity friendly, or in line with the new vision of the SDGs. So that is an important agenda to follow. We are expecting biodiversity COP may be also convened there, and Italy will host the pre-COP26. November, obviously, the agenda for Glasgow for COP, climate COP, and there is a possibility that the third Rio Convention, the UN Desertification Convention, may also convene their 15th climate conference of parties in Bonn, in case there are no other countries to host it. And we don't know whether Bonn will be able to host it physically, but the reason why it is all Bonn is that just like UNFCCC Secretariat, UN Desertification Secretariat is also based in Bonn, as the seat of the Secretariat. So according to the procedures, that in case there are no countries who wish to host the COP, the COPs are hosted by the seat of the Secretariat, which is in this case Bonn and Germany. With this, I think I've come to the end of my presentation. Final remark is that our webpage will be up and running for your information. You can download, or you can access to the recordings, to the documents, and then you can access to other documents, which will of course populate more on the way in the weeks and months to come. And now I'd like to open the floor if any of our audience wishes to contribute by raising hand or typing in the chat box, or intervening verbally. You are now, you have the chance to intervene if you like. I don't see too much hands raised or any question in the question box. Obviously, any minutes saved this year, especially in the last weeks of before the winter break, for some in the Northern Hemisphere, is always valuable. So we can call this session closed if there are not too much need for clarification or questions or remarks. I see silence in that sense, a bit approval of our proposal. So maybe in this sense, maybe I can deliver my last concluding remarks, not just for today's webinar, but across the whole year. I'd like to express my gratitude for all the participants and partners of the LGMA for their dedication and collaboration. I think we demonstrated that in these difficult moments of time, local governments are even more important. Again, with our leadership, with our engagement, with our visionary examples that recovering from COVID-19 can be much more inclusive, can be much more effective if it is connected to climate action, if it is taking into account other emergencies. And we have also seen that in this one world, in this kind of global challenges, the biggest asset of our humanity is the solidarity among nations, among citizens, among stakeholders. I think this is a very big lesson learned from the COVID year in 2020, because it was not the finances accounts in our banks, it was not the technologies that we were deployed in our cities or countries, but it was the social fabric, the social, let's say, unity or solidarity that helped us the most, or the most effectively. Obviously, we would have like to address the economic and human losses, but it will be giving us the hope that as long as we can be able to take lessons from this response to this global crisis through a collective action, we can be confident that the bigger agendas on climate and biodiversity measures can also be addressed and can be elevated to a new peak in terms of ambition if we act collectively. And therefore, Paris Agreement, the UN multilateral processes, and constituency-based engagement of local origin groups are important. With these closing remarks, I wish you all a successful wrap-up days ahead, and wish you all a safe and healthy and happy winter break, or let's say holiday break, in the next couple of weeks. Starting from January, we will start again the LGMA webinars. It will be every third Wednesday, and we'll share with you the agendas as well. So with that, once again, thank you all, and have a nice day and have a nice evening.